Welcome to The Outsiders Chapter 5 and 6 analysis. Most of Chapter 5 takes place over the course of 5 days in the abandoned church that Dolly recommended to Johnny and Ponyboy. This chapter sees the theme of loss of innocence become more and more developed, especially in the ways Ponyboy and Johnny are changing. Like in the other chapters, S.E. Hinton uses a number of different tools to develop the central themes and make her characters more likable, more relatable, and more realistic. Right at the start of Chapter 5, Pony wakes up from a dream and for a moment tries to hold on to the possibility that the events of the previous day hadn't really happened. Ponyboy is briefly in a state of denial, where he is desperately holding on to the dream that this might not be true. Which other character did we study this year that was so desperate to hold on to an untrue fact? Later on, in the next page, essentially, Ponyboy has really snapped back to reality. He has this reality check where he finally quits pretending and pushes himself to get up and move on with the day in this new circumstance. Symbolism plays a big part of Chapter 5. Firstly, with Pony and Johnny deciding to cut their hair, which is an act that is much more symbolic than just a simple way of disguising themselves. What message are the boys sending by cutting off their hair, which is essentially the thing that best represents the greasers? Think back to On the Sidewalk Bleeding when trying to figure out the symbolic meaning of this gesture. Another key element emerging from Chapter 5 is the way in which Johnny and Pony are changing, which is especially evident in Johnny. Early on in Chapter 5, the boys talk about what happened, and the reader can see that this event has hugely impacted both of their lives forever. On the left-hand side, you have two excerpts taken from Johnny and Ponyboy's discussion about the events surrounding Bob's murder. The first excerpt, you have Johnny saying that things have been happening so fast. What is he talking about? Now, obviously, he's talking about the murder, but let's try to take that beyond the murder. Let's try to tie it back to growing up. What has happened so fast in the last couple of days? Johnny goes on to talk about these events, and he blows up. He says, "Stop it. Shut up about last night. I killed somebody last night." I want you to look at this passage and highlight key words and write down adjectives that best describe how Johnny's feeling. Now I want you to pay particular attention to the last part where Johnny says, "I didn't mean to, but that they were drowning you." This is really important. It reveals the confusion that Johnny's feeling and his motivation for his action. Although he didn't like Bob, although he was afraid of Bob, I don't think it was fear that motivated him to stab Bob. Now the last excerpt I want you to pay attention to is on the right-hand side. Johnny and Ponyboy have been crying for a little while, and then suddenly Ponyboy says, "We ain't gonna cry no more, are we?" And they both agree, no, crying is over. In this moment, I want you to identify what happened to the boys. Again, try to connect it to our theme of growing up. Something happened when they consciously made the decision to move on, to not cry anymore. Now, until Dolly arrives, the boys spend the rest of this chapter trying to numb themselves from the situation or from thinking about the situation. They do this by playing cards and reading Gone with the excerpts or reading the book Gone with the Wind, which again shows not only how they are becoming less sensitive to violence, but also shows how the boys have really lost or are beginning to lose their innocence. As I've already mentioned, Chapter 5 is very rich with symbolism and character development. In earlier chapters, we explored the symbol of the sunset, and in this chapter, Ponyboy and Johnny are actually watching the sun rise when Ponyboy thinks of Robert Frost's most famous poem, "Nothing Gold Can Stay." Now, there's going to be another video that analyzes this very important poem, so make sure you watch the video before completing your poem analysis. The reference to this poem definitely shows, once again, how Ponyboy is different and more sensitive from the other greasers, but it also reveals how Johnny is very reflective and has a lot of the street smarts that we talked about in our first quick write. The end of chapter 5 and throughout chapter 6, the reader definitely gains more insight into the family-like bond between the greasers and the changes that each of the guys are experiencing because of the drama surrounding Bob's murder. In chapters 5 and 6, Ponyboy is definitely changing and gaining new realizations and maturity, and he's gaining this ability to see people differently. Read this passage on the screen and take notes of how Pony is starting to see changes in people. Notice that once again Ponyboy is thinking about Cherry, a character that he briefly met at the drive-in. Once again he's realizing just how similar the Socs and the Greasers are. Other characters that Pony gains an appreciation for include Dolly, and this really comes from Johnny and how much Johnny looks up to him, even calling Dolly, this big thug, a southern gentleman, comparing him to the character they're reading about in Gone with the Wind. Another character that Ponyboy gains a deeper respect and understanding and appreciation for is his older brother Derry. He finally realizes just how much Derry loves him and worries about him. This realization comes from the letter that Soda sent to Ponyboy, and also when Ponyboy saw Derry's reaction at the hospital. The reaction was quite touching. Derry was standing there with his fists in his pocket, and he just let go of his tough look. He let his emotions out. And in that moment, Ponyboy had this powerful realization that his brother, who's somewhat like his father, really loves him and watches out for him and wants his best interest, like any parent would. This realization finally put an end to the person versus person conflict that involved the Curtis brothers. Another character that went through some major changes in chapters 5 and 6 is Dolly, who is definitely the toughest of the greasers, but through these chapters the reader reveals that he definitely has a equally protective and sensitive side, especially when it comes to Johnny and Ponyboy. What I would invite you to do now is look at the following passages on the screen and explore this transformation in Dolly. Look at why he's so protective and loving towards Johnny and Ponyboy. What is he hoping to do or accomplish by doing so? There's one passage in particular on the right-hand side where Dolly's reacting to Johnny saying, "Hey, I'm going to confess, I'm going to turn myself in." I want you to look at this passage. Was Dolly really mad or upset? Or was he just concerned at the fact that if Johnny turned himself in, he could no longer protect him like he's doing right now? On the screen you have yet another passage where Dolly is talking to the boys about how jail makes you grow up faster. And as I mentioned earlier, in these chapters, Ponyboy definitely started to see Dolly in a new light, realizing that Dolly grew up too fast because what happened to him in his childhood. So Ponyboy is not only changing how he sees Derry, but also how he's coming to see Dolly. The last character that has gone through some major changes in chapters 5 and 6 is Johnny, who by far is the character that has changed and that has grown up the most over the course of the last 5 days following the death of Bob. In chapters 5 and 6, the reader definitely gets to see the caring side of Johnny. Johnny is really concerned about Derry and Soda's reaction to Ponyboy being gone, which reveals that he's very caring and thoughtful. Earlier I talked about Johnny's reaction to the poem Nothing Gold Can Stay, which reveals that Johnny, although a high school dropout, is very street and life smart. His analysis about Dolly, or his connection between Dolly and the Southern gentleman in Gone with the Wind, shows that he sees things, he understands things in ways that school probably never would have been able to teach him. Finally, we see the responsible and the mature side of Johnny. He's definitely, although he's scared, he's definitely taking responsibility for his actions when he decides to turn himself in, despite Dolly's very legitimate concerns. Now, the one thing that hasn't changed very much in this chapter is Johnny's connection or committedness to his family. Even though he comes from an abusive home, he still holds on to this hope that his parents might be thinking about him or might love him. He asks Dolly, have my parents, worried about me? Or my parents are worried about me. And Dolly has to tell him the truth, but adds that the other greasers are thinking about him. So once again revealing just how important Johnny is to the greaser group. Lastly, in chapter 6, the themes of honor among thieves and seeing people for who they are once again emerge. On the screen you have Ponyboy saying, we started it, or referring to the church fire that they were witnessing before their eyes. The idea that they, Johnny and Ponyboy, may have caused the church fire caused the two of them to risk their lives and rescue the children. What's interesting about the events at the church is that they mirror the events at the park. Both Ponyboy and Johnny went in to save the children from the burning church. Then at the end, when they were both trying to escape, Johnny pushed Ponyboy out of the way, essentially saving his life. And then when Dolly realized that both boys were in trouble, he came to both of their rescue. Again, similar to what happened in the park, when Ponyboy was in trouble, Johnny saved his life, essentially when he stabbed Bob. And when Dolly realized that both Johnny and Ponyboy were in trouble, he helped them get away. What's the meaning of all this, or why is it important? The greasers are thieves. They're the thugs. They're not well liked. And yet, time and time again, they do the right thing. Again, reiterating this idea that there's honor among them. There's respect within them. From everything we know about the Socs, this isn't the case with them. At the end of chapter 6, S.E. Hinton once again touches on the theme of seeing people for who they are, not what they do or what their social status is. This theme emerges in the very touching scene between Jerry, the school teacher at the church site, and Ponyboy in the ambulance. I would like you to highlight passages that show how Jerry views Ponyboy and his friends, and answer the question, does this change when he learns the truth about what Johnny and Ponyboy have done? It's interesting to note that much like Jerry, very similar in names, saw these boys for who they were and not by their look, their past deeds, and their social status. Jerry's treatment of Ponyboy is not affected by the stereotypes that have typically dominated this community or the Tolson community. Now, I've said this a few times in previous videos, and it should definitely be on your codes and convention chart, but S.E. Hinton loves to use foreshadowing. And in chapter 5, Dolly briefly mentions how the conflict between the Socs and the greasers is escalating and getting more and more prevalent, and it's getting more dangerous. So what I'd like you to do in reply to this video is make a very brief one-sentence prediction about S.E. Hinton's repeated use of foreshadowing and what this possibly could say in this future rivalry between these two gangs. Hope you're still enjoying the book, and I look forward to reading some of your predictions and possibly answering any questions you might have in chapters 5 or 6, or about the poem analysis that you will be looking at in the next video.